Hi everyone. Yeah, here we go. We're doing this again. Now, this is going to be the first of my little video sessions into scale plastic modeling. Primarily maybe because winter's coming and maybe, you know, getting out and running your RC in the rain and the snow isn't going to happen. And maybe you don't fancy spending £500 on a new RC. I know I don't. So you're looking for something else to do. Well, this is a great thing to do. I think in terms of your RC hobby, I think there's definitely a crossover, definitely some advantages, especially if you're going to get into hard bodies and you're going to start adding some details and working with plastics and things like that. This is a good thing to be doing because it's cheap, it's great practice, and there's a lot of skills that can be transferred over. So I'm going to introduce the idea of a few kits to you, and I'm going to talk about the things that you might need to have at your disposal to get started with. So the first thing I'm going to talk about will be, what are you going to make? And what I'm going to suggest to you is that what you should be doing is getting started with an armoured vehicle. Okay, so here's a couple. Tamiya do they're the kind of ubiquitous armoured vehicle model suppliers. Okay, you've got what have I got here? I've got a Deuce and a Half from World War II American truck. I've got a German staff car, Kubelwagen type thing, and those are 35th scale. So they're going to make up a truck. The truck will be about year big, the car probably a little less, obviously. And they're your kind of de facto kits. I would imagine the Kubelwagen's probably about 15 quid. The truck, if you can find it, it's an old kit now. This one, maybe 20 quid. I've also got here the Rubicon Vietnam version of that Deuce and a Half truck, which I'm currently building. It's in the kitchen, it just was sprayed last night, so the paint's drying off. This is 56 scale. These are 35th scale, which broadly speaking means the chassis on this is about half the size of the chassis on the Tamiya kit. The point of an armour kit, the reason I'm saying this as opposed to an aircraft kit, which is traditionally what I would build, the armour kits are great because they allow you to build and then paint. Very little on these kits can't be painted once you finish the building. You know, in a tank, if you think about what a tank looks like, there's virtually nothing on the inside to paint, right? It's all on the outside. So you can get that building thing done, and then you can paint it as you see fit at the end. An aircraft is usually a little bit more complicated. There's going to be painting inside the building, and you're back and forwards. So there is more room for error in an armoured vehicle. You know, there's a lot more scope for hiding your mistakes with some mud and filth at the end of the build. You know, you can always paint on some mud and say, well, it's a dirty tank. You know, what are you going to do? An aircraft, generally speaking, you don't have as many places to hide. So if you're starting out, if you want to cut your teeth on this, I would suggest you go and get yourself a Tamiya kit, or you know, the Rubicon ones that we've just been sent by Rubicon themselves, which is really nice. These are very simple builds. I'm going to say I'm most of the way through this one. We'll talk more about the building and the actual product in probably the next video when we talk about actually gluing things together. So, but anyway, that's what I would start with. That's what I would be looking at starting with. An armoured vehicle of some size. And another word about aeroplanes as well. If you're going to start with an aeroplane, if you're determined, you're just going to go willy-nilly do your own thing, don't start with a 72nd scale aeroplane, because they're like this and they've got lots of tiny little parts. So you'd want to get a bigger box, okay, a bigger scale, bigger box. But as I say, armour is where I would go first. Now, what are you going to need to make it with? Some of this you will probably have with your RC hobby, but some of it you won't. So, what are you going to start with? Basic tools I'm going to start with are for cutting, because you're going to get a bunch of parts on a sprue. For example, let's take something out of here, shall we? So you've got to get those parts off those plastic trees. And to do so, I'm going to suggest 3 tools. The first of which, and the most obvious perhaps, is the hobby knife. Now, I use a scalpel. A lot of people use scalpels for this, but you can use an X-Acto knife, any kind of hobby knife. You've probably got one already, as long as it's got replaceable blades, because they get dull quite quickly, and sharp blades are really useful. Obviously dangerous, of course, bear that in mind, but yeah, any kind of knife with a delicate blade, and it's quite nice because these are bendy blades as well, but some kind of hobby knife. Next up, I'm going to say clippers. So these are like little pliers, but they're for snipping said parts off the tree, off the sprue tree. They've got a flat angle on them. You maybe see that there. They've got a flat side and they've got a non-flat side. I've only recently acquired these, primarily because Terry bought some and I got a bit envious because they looked like really cool things. But they're not great for everything because some parts are really delicate, and snipping with these is a bit of a sort of blunt trauma, and you can bend and snap, and not always great. So sometimes I will slice things off the tree rather than snipping them with these. And obviously these blades are quite thick, and you've got some tiny parts, maybe they're too thick. The third thing I'm going to suggest to you is a razor saw, a plastic saw. Now this is a fairly heavy duty Sweeney Todd type arrangement, but you can buy small kind of serrated razor blades for a few pounds off hobby shops. Anything like that that's got teeth, very, very fine teeth on it, and these ones are specifically designed to cut on the way back rather than on the way through. So they work slightly differently to a normal saw. I guess not all of them do that, but this one certainly does. It's supposed to have a paintbrush or something in the handle here. And what I will do sometimes is I will saw things off the sprue tree rather than clipping them or pulling them or snapping them. Basically your sprue tree, let's go back to this. So your sprue tree, you see, it's all one piece of plastic. This is all injection molded. It's all one piece of plastic. So they are literally connected together, and if you rip that connection, you could end up with a hole in the piece you're going to use, and that's a hole you're probably going to have to either hide or fill or live with. If you saw the part off the tree, you don't run that risk of ripping it out, but if you clip or you cut, you do. So I will sometimes use a saw if I think there's a danger that I'm going to damage the part. So those three things, I would certainly get yourself organized to remove the parts from the trees. Now, after that, what are we talking about? Well, the parts that you take off the tree will probably need some cleaning up. And that's where a nail file kit, a nail polishing kit, can come in really useful. Now, you can go and buy dedicated modeling files, metal files and so on. They're quite expensive for what they are, and I found this on Amazon. Somebody else on YouTube was using one, and it is basically a nail polishing kit. It comes with two, it's all glass, these are all glass files. You get two glass files, hard glass files that do sanding, and you get two that do polishing. So these are, there's a little bit of texture on there, but there's a lot on there, okay? So you get two for polishing, polishing your nails, and two for filing. And the point of having something hard to file with is that if you, it gives you a chance to file something flat, Not everything's curved, right? So you want to file something flat, you're going to need something hard and flat and sanding-ish to work with. So I would recommend these. They're not a lot of money, like 10 quid or something on Amazon, and they're much cheaper. You get much more value for money than if you buy a proper metal filing thing. And of course, the other thing you can use, which of course I'm sure you've all got access to, is sandpaper. This is another staple. Now, I've got 3 sheets of sandpaper here. They're all slightly different because they're different grades. But what they do share in common is that they are wet and dry paper. And I would always suggest wet and dry paper, or waterproof sandpaper, as it says on the back. They're waterproof paper. the point of wet and dry sandpaper is that you can use it wet, and the point of that is that as you sand and you get plastic building up in the sandpaper, if it's wet, that plastic will float away or be washed away if you've got a little glass of water by your side, and it retains the grit, so the grit stays sharp and the sandpaper becomes much more useful to you. I've got 3 standard grades here, and I would suggest you have some of each. P400 for the initial removing of things, removing of plastic. P600 for removing the scratches that the 400 has left, and P1000 for removing the scratches that the 600 has left. But what about the scratches the P1000 has left? Well, this is very fine, and it doesn't leave many scratches, and the scratches it does leave, your paint will generally cover. So this is where it stops. You can go finer, okay, if you feel the need to, and there will be times maybe when you do. But for general purpose use, certainly to get you started, I would look at buying a couple of sheets of each grade here, 4, 6 and 1000. You'll go through more 400 than you go through 600, and more 600 than you go through 1000. Generally that's the way it works. I use mine by cutting it into strips, as you can see, you know, little rectangle strips, and that's the sandpaper that I would use. Okay, so that gets you the things cut off your sprue. You can tidy them up a little bit. You will find that a lot of the parts that you take out of the sprue do have mold lines on them, because they are cast as 2 sheets of plastic, two molds pushed together, plastic inserted down the middle, and you're going to get a gap. You're going to get a molding line on that piece, and you're going to need to remove it. So that's what the sanding's all about, generally speaking. Before you start making anything, that's what you might want to have to do. Now, from that point, you might then start gluing things together, which is where we bring in our glues. Okay, now, there are broadly 2 types of glues here. We're going to have plastic cement, which is M3, and we're going to have super glue, which of course is that one. Those are the 2 types of glue generally used in modelling, and it's certainly what I would start you off with. Now I'm going to put this one with the blue cap to one side. I'm going to talk about these 2. These 2 are your standard default plastic cements. Tamiya extra fine. This is like water, and you can see it. I know it's got label all the way through it, all the way around it, but can you maybe make out that it sloshes around like it is literally water thin. And I've got some Revell, which is a German modelling company. They make model kits, but they're not so common in the RC world. You may not have come across them. I've got some Revell Contactor, and this is the same stuff, but it's thicker. Okay, now this, as I say, comes. It's really thin. It comes with a brush, which is really handy, but it is water thin. So the benefit of it being water thin is that it will run into the gaps on 2 pieces you're gluing together. So you can put a bead on, and it will run down the gap in a capillary action. And what they all do is they melt the plastic together. So the idea is the joint actually can disappear into melted plastic. You sand it smooth, and the joint literally becomes invisible. But this is really thin. This is quite thick, and the benefit of the thick things, the thicker glue, is if I squeeze a bit out here from its metal applicator, you might see that it doesn't actually fall out of the end of the tube. It's still a little bit runny. It will run. It will drop out eventually if you squeeze it enough. But it is much thicker than this one, which is very much it just spreads, and it's like water. There are going to be times when the thick stuff is good, because if you're holding 2 pieces together and you try and run the watery stuff in, it can go all over your fingers as well, and then you end up with fingerprints on your model and everything else. So there are going to be, this is the one I use the most, but there are times when having something thicker and slightly less inclined to run around everywhere, where this one's a little bit better for that. Now the other type of plastic cement is this one. And there are 1 or 2 others, Plasti-Weld, and these are basically, I'll be perfectly honest with you, I don't really know what differs. I just know that there are different applications. This will melt a resin-based plastic, whereas the other ones won't. The Rubicon models is a more resin-based plastic. It's a harder, slightly different consistency. The standard ones are more for your styrene based, your Airfix kits, your general run-of-the-mill plastic model kits, and your white sheets of styrene you might buy to scratch build with. These are fine. But this is more for your cross RC type of model, which is a hard yellow plastic. So you might find, you know, that if you these aren't necessary for your plastic models here. So I'll just make you aware, if you've made a cross RC kit before and you've bought a big bottle of Plasti-Weld or something, it will work on your Airfix kit as well. It might be a little bit aggressive, but it will work on it certainly. But this Tamiya stuff won't work on a cross RC truck. Okay, it's not strong enough to melt the resin. So you might, you know, this is kind of like the deluxe version. All of them are incredibly stinky. They evaporate really quickly, and make sure you've got a window open, okay, or a fan blowing, or some sort of air ventilation thing going on, because they do stink and they'll give you a headache before much longer. I would also say avoid anything that comes out of a tube for modelling. Any modelling cement that is sold to you in a tube like the old days, because it will probably be really stringy. It's a bit like hot glue, and it is a complete nightmare to work with. And there's no need these days. You know, these two are much easier to work with than your traditional tube-based modelling cement. Stay well away from that, okay? These two will set you up nicely. Then, of course, there's super glue, which, of course, you all know and love, I'm sure. You've all got some super glue to hand. I will just point out that there are different types of super glue available. Rather than just using Loctite, because that's in the supermarket, if you go to a model store or a model shop online, you will find all sorts of different types of super glue. I like this is a thick super glue, so it doesn't run around the place too much, on your fingers, for example. And it says on the back here that it sets in 10 or 12 seconds, so it's not instant. You can move things around, reposition them, and then it'll hold. I did have some really thin super glue as well, but I found it too much of a pain in the neck. It evaporated really quickly, and it literally just ran everywhere. So and you don't really want super glue running everywhere, because it's a nightmare to get off. And if you've got any clear plastic, the super glue will probably fog it, turn it white and misty, and it'll be a disaster. So I generally only stick to thick grade super glue. Now, moving on from super glues and glues in general, what I would is a sort of segue. The next thing I would look to have on your workbench is a pin vise with a pin in it, or a needle. This is a sewing needle from a sewing kit. All right, and the idea of the pin vise, obviously, is it's a vise that you twist. You can see it, there you go. So it's got a little twist grip on it. Little hand drill, little hand chuck. These are generally sold as. But pin vise, you might hear them called as well. And the benefit of this, certainly, it's great for applying super glue to things. And it's also obviously good for stabbing things. And, you know, anytime you want to scratch a line, or you want to make a hole in your plastic to make a rivet, for example, or to make a kind of detail point, it will work for that as well. But I generally will use this for applying super glue to something, because the nozzle on this is quite broad and clumsy, and probably crusted in super glue, whereas you get a nice bead on the end of your needle and you can just drop it where you want it. Okay? Tweezers are a good thing to have as well. Okay, so these are quite flat tweezers, quite flat bladed ones for nose hairs and things like that. And make sure there's none on. It'd be a bit gross, wouldn't it? And I would also suggest you get a needle set, really thin pointy ones. They're quite good. And you can also get locking ones, which work in the opposite way to these. Obviously with these, they're open until you squeeze them, and then they close. You know, nothing new there. But you can get the ones that work the other way around, so that they are locked tight until you squeeze them open, and then you let go and it locks tight again. So they're great for holding things, for gripping things. Okay. But yeah, one or two sets of tweezers, can't go wrong with those either. And they don't have to be anything fancy. You can go to Boots, you go to chemists and buy them there. you buy Tamiya ones and they're like 20 quid. You go to a chemist, you buy them for £1.50. It's exactly the same thing. They're tweezers, people. Okay, so don't lose focus with what this thing is. Because it's got Tamiya stamped on it doesn't mean it's going to be any better than anything else. And the last thing I'm going to point out to you that may be a surprise to you is Tippex, or correction fluid, as this is. And what it does is this is a pen. You give it a shake and clean it off a little bit, and it's got a little sort of press to work nozzle. Squeeze it, and white fluid comes out. Now I could say something rude there, but I'm not going to, just in case. And when that sets, which is a few minutes, you can sand it flat. You can paint over it. So this is what I use to fill gaps on the model. When I've put two pieces of plastic together and there is a line visible, I will put this on it to hide the line. Sand it smooth, paint it, job done. If you've got a little hole after you've clipped it off the sprue and you put it together, there's a tiny little kind of scar, pop this in it, sand it flat, job done. It's on Amazon. You can buy 4 of these for a tenner, you know, and it'll last you for ages. Okay, I would use this over model filler every day of the week. Model filler is great if you've got a gap the size of your finger end, but if you've only got a tiny little piece, model filler generally won't stick in it. It won't bite. It won't stay. You'll end up washing it out, sanding it out. This I find infinitely nicer, infinitely better. And the last thing really I'm going to say to you is I'm going to suggest you have some of these, which you probably already have, and I'm going to suggest you have some cocktail sticks, because cocktail sticks, oh god, that one's away. Cocktail sticks are again a great thing for applying super glue, and they are a great thing for you know, they're a great thing for holding pieces with. You can stab something with it, or put a piece of plastic on here and you can spray it or paint it. And so I use my cocktail sticks for all sorts of things, and obviously they make great scale logs as well if you really want a scale stick. But yeah, cocktail sticks, Q-tips, or cotton buds as we call them in this country, they would round out my essentials for modelling. Okay, there's not many. It's not a huge collection of bits and bobs, you know. It's not a huge collection at all, and you know, I think you kind of set that. I can get it all on the table mat. Oh, and I would suggest also cutting mat if you haven't got a cutting mat already. Not an RC kind of rubber mat, because they just cut straight through. But a self-healing hobby mat. You're going to be doing a lot more cutting and slicing than you probably would be used to with RC. So yeah, this is a little one here that I use for moving around the house as I'm doing different things and taking places. If I'm going to go somewhere and I'm going to do some of this, I will take, you know, just basically what you see here. You know, just a little. There you go. I'll take that with me. So that's what I would suggest is the basics. And I would suggest you start with an armour kit, because they're simple to make and simple to get going with. And that's what I'm going to say. That's going to be this video, I think, folks. So thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you next time for part 2 of how to make a plastic model. Yeah, that's a snappy title, isn't it? Bet no one's thought of that. All right, toodle pip. Now go and get yourself something nice to make and get on with it. I'll see you soon. Bye all.